So who are the Dramatis Personae? Well, basically, you have a villain. And what the villain does is villainy. He goes out, he struggles with the hero, he pursues the hero, he does something bad. You have donors. Donors going to go give something. The donor is typically going to provide the hero with a magical agent. He's going to do so by setting a test, setting some kind of challenge that the hero will rise to. You've got a helper. Well, the helper helps in a number of different ways. Sometimes the helper will be in the form of being able to transfer the hero from one location to another. Sometimes the hero will perform a test on behalf of the hero, but there's a helper. You have the strange function of the princess and her father. And that's an unusual one because you'd think there would be two. But the princess is often the person who is being sought. And again, I do want to verify that Propp's corpus of legends was a limited number of Russian tales. I'm going to introduce more qualifications as we go. But he had a limited number of Russian tales, and almost exclusively, the tales dealt with, almost exclusively, the tales dealt with a male, or a presented as male, hero. And they were fairly fiercely heteronormative and binary in their telling. We can talk about this later. But the thing about the princess is the one who is often sought. The princess is often the one who is the victim of a villainy. And why you have the princess and her father as basically one Dramatis Personae is that the father is often going to do things like set difficult tasks to the hero at the end. They're also going to do things like punish. So there's going to be things that logically within the way the story has to fall out, the princess might not be able to actually fulfill those. So the two are often tied into each other. You have the dispatcher. Dispatcher really only ever serves one particular function. And the dispatcher is the one who sends the hero out on the quest, who lets the hero know that there is some villainy that has transpired, some lack that needs to be liquidated, and initiates the hero's movement. You have the hero. I don't think I necessarily need to explain too much about the hero at this stage, but the hero is going to be the person who does something heroic. They are the one who is going to ultimately redress the villainy. They are the one who's ultimately going to liquidate the lack. They are the one who is ultimately going to be rewarded for having done so. You also have the false hero. The false hero will sometimes be trying to do what the hero does. The false hero might make errors along the way. We might actually begin our story thinking that this is the hero, and then he, not always, but often he, fails the tests. And sometimes a second false hero goes out. And he, not always, but often, he fails those tests. And it's only the third time when the actual hero comes out. The false hero might later on decide to present himself as the actual hero and claim reward, at which point there is often a test set by the princess and or her father that the false hero cannot pass, but of course the hero can. It's a limited number of functions. Not all functions are going to be present in all tales. You would be surprised how many functions are present in how many tales. Sometimes functions, whole sort of secondary sections drop out. Sometimes the preparatory section is implied in the telling as opposed to made explicit. And I'll talk about that in a second too. But again, you will be amazed at how much it does work, because it's all basically a logical sequence of events. And here we go. You begin with a preparatory section where you have first some kind of initial situation, some kind of implied stasis. And it is usually, in fact, almost exclusively, it is a stasis that is defined by being a static, safe, secure, and again, given the Eurocentric, patriarchal, heteronormative cultures in which so many of these were collected, typically a standard heteronormative household, parents, children. The implied initial structure is stasis, status quo, that way. We can go back in time and we can find and discover that that heteronormativity is not as widespread as we would think. It is not a universal, but it is very, very common, in part because, given the text that we have, that is what our heteronormative collectors collected. So we don't want to push that model as an absolute without denying the fact that much of our data presents this as more than plurality, but the majority of tales. But that initial situation is not irrelevant, even if it's implied, even if the stories begin later on, if the narration in any particular version doesn't happen until section A, or function A, which we'll get to in a second. So then you have a series of pairings. You have some kind of absentation. The family is broken momentarily. Sometimes it's the matter of a parent leaving, sometimes it's the matter of a parent dying, and sometimes it's the matter of a child moving away. Not necessarily departing the family, but a child momentarily away from the safety of the family. So you can consider that. He doesn't even indicate this as a pair, but that might be something that you want to consider as functions of a pair. From that alpha, which is the sign that he gives, to the beta move in this preparatory section, you have wholeness and then you have fracture. Those two are necessary pairs. You then have some kind of interdiction. Don't do this. You had better do this. Don't forget to do this. And then, of course, once you introduce some kind of rule that cannot be broken, someone's got to break that rule. Oh, you know that someone's got to break that rule. And so again, you have some kind of pairing. You have the function of reconnaissance, where the villain seeks out some information, some kind of advantage over some kind of victim. And of course, eventually, they get that information. They find out something and then can use it to their advantage. They then attempt to use that information. They attempt to deceive some poor victim. And of course, ultimately, they succeed in tricking that victim. Pair, 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 logical sequence. And because they have succeeded, you have some kind of misfortune, some kind of initial situation. Now, all of that might be implied in the narrative. So then you start getting to the meat of the stories, where you get to the very, well, you can tell that it's indicative of something because he stops using the Greek letters and he starts using the Roman alphabet to talk about the various functions. And the first one is villainy. This is the thing that you need. This is the precipitating incident. If you don't have this, you don't have a story. The villainy is either someone has done something to a person directly, there is some kind of act of a villain, or it could be some kind of lack is in place. It could be the father has fallen sick and a remedy is required. It could be penury, it could be poverty, and therefore money is needed. So it's not a villainy that is a consequence of a particular actor, but it is something that needs to be redressed. that villainy is made known to the hero. And there's two kinds of heroes. There is the hero who is a seeker, basically, that the villainy happened to someone else. And then he goes off. He is told. The information is communicated to him, and he decides to take on the role of seeker. The flip side is that he's a victimized seeker, and that the villainy has been done to him, and he is redressing that villainy somehow. So he is going out and seeking it in some kind of solving his own problems, basically. And then you have, as I said, the dispatcher. Really, the dispatcher is someone who only comes around and says, hey, this has happened. I want to take one brief pause here, because the thing about the connection between the Dramatis Personae and the character is that it isn't necessarily a one-to-one relationship. First of all, you can have situations where one character fulfills the role of both a donor and a helper. They could even fulfill the role of a dispatcher. The hero can also be his own or her own dispatcher, where, oh, daddy's sick, I must do something about this. And so you really don't have the character anymore. One moment, the action communicating the villainy to the hero is done by the same character that is the hero themselves. So it shows through the general applicability, because Propp is focused on particular actions and then how they're manifested. The other thing is that, particularly in longer and compound tales, a dispatcher could come in the form of 3 people. A donor could come in the form of 3 people. And what is more, it is not entirely impossible for the hero to come in the form of people, because you might get so far in the narrative and then the hero basically has some kind of incident where the next set of actions are fulfilled by a different character, so that character has assumed the mantle of, or assumed the Dramatis Personae of hero. It gets complicated, but it gets fun. So, villainy. Oh no! A villainy has happened! Mediation, the connective incident. Aha! Beginning the counteraction. The hero agrees to seek out, to redress, and then goes. Moves, departure. Movement is an important thing. The movement away from that situation. And again, the hero often has some kind of initial situation. The hero, of course, can be the person upon whom the villainy has been acted, or someone in the family who can be the victim, and the hero can be a member of that family who seeks to redress, or whatever. But basically, the hero removes themselves entirely from that social setting and is on their own. And the is on their own is an important aspect, which we can get to later. But you'll kind of want to think of things. And then you have this great sort of triumvirate, the D-E-F. The D is the circumstances are suggested for some kind of test. The DEF is basically a test triptych. So the donor suggests some kind of test to the hero. The hero reacts to the donor's suggestion, hopefully succeeds. And when they succeed, the donor gives the hero some kind of magical agent. That magical agent is going to help him on his quest, often through, maybe it's a weapon, maybe it's a flying horse, maybe it's a helper, and they can fly away. But what is important is that you have a series of tests. You often have a series of tests. As I said, sometimes the false hero is going to come, the donor is going to challenge, and the false hero is going to fail, and then does not get the magical agent, and then wonk, And then the false hero comes back, doesn't get the magical agent, or the second false hero, and it's only the true hero. Now, it doesn't have to be a test in the way we understand tests. Often they are subtle things, like they're tests of kindness. And oh, pity me. Oh, I'm such a poor beggar boy. Please give me some alms. And then, no! Failed test. No! Failed test. Of course, you can have half my supper, and you can have my hat. And then lo and behold, thank you, and behold, and because of this, take this egg. An egg? What'll I do with an egg? Boom! Flying dinosaur, mother flippers. So you have that. So having had the test, spatial transference. He continues on his way. No, he has left home, but he can basically, this is when he is able to transfer himself to a different kingdom of some description. Here's where it starts to get confusing, because you wouldn't think it would happen this early. Eventually, he struggles with the villain. Eventually, that's going to happen. He struggles with the villain. Struggle, struggle, struggle. Sometimes he is branded or marked. And branding can be in the form of a scar. I lost my eye. Or branding can be in the form of getting some kind of new outfit. Oh, look at me. And so, it doesn't necessarily need to be a terrible kind of branding. It can be a fortunate kind of branding. But anyway, in some kind of struggle. And then the villain is defeated. Sometimes the villain is killed right there. Boom. Killed. You're done. Now again, you can start compounding your tales, because sometimes you would get to this point and the villain is, you think it's the villain, but lo and behold, it's not the villain. It's just like a mini boss. And it's like, oh no, someone reemerges as a dispatcher and says, yeah, that wasn't the villain. Princess is in a different kingdom. And then you go all the way back. You go all the way back to C. You go all the way back to, I guess I got to go to this next one, C, D, E, F. And then you keep on going back into H and I, and then again. And then again. Struggle, 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 struggle. Over and over and over again. But sometimes you defeat the villain. At that time, often the situation ends. The villainy is over. It has been redressed. The princess has been rescued. The lack has been liquidated. And lo and behold, in many instances, the stories simply end there. Or, as I said, the story just continues. The hero returns home and is potentially subject to some other villainy. Or, as I said, at least in our narrative world, we discover that it's not a false villain. I don't want to introduce that concept, but basically that it was only one of many villains, and it becomes a compounding of this narrative, because we can complexify. But what's going to happen is that the exact same set of functions are going to be repeated through different characteristics, through different actions on the level of story. So it'll be both the same as and different from before. But you can compound tales over and over again. So if there's a pursuit, if someone starts chasing after the hero, well, then the hero is rescued at some point. And then eventually they get back. They get to two different places. One is either returns home, back to that initial socio-context, or arrives in a different kingdom. But basically, wherever the possibility of recognition for the heroism is going to be taking place. So whether he's returning home and demonstrating that the lack has been liquidated, or the villainy that has been done to his own place has been fixed. Or conversely, if he was just on a classic princess rescue, he went on to ZipRecruiter, looked up, his dispatcher was like, oh, a princess needs rescuing, and then please deliver to the kingdom of Zul. It goes to Zul, and that's what happens. But he's often unrecognized. He's been marked. He's been branded. Maybe he's in disguise. He's not known to be the hero. Meanwhile, there might be a false hero kicking around. And this false hero could be the same character as is the villain. We do not know necessarily. But at this point, they are a false hero because they are making claims to having been the actual hero. And so some kind of test is set. And Propp calls it the difficult task. And he wants to distinguish the difficult task from the test. And the way you distinguish a difficult task from a test is that if at the end of the difficult task, you get recognized as the hero and often rewarded with the princess, then that is a task. If you receive a magical agent, then that is a test. So, be forewarned. Now, these are in a logical sequence. They might actually appear out of order as clusters, but he is trying to bring it down to the most logical possible string. Subsequently, in the morphology, because as you see and as you read, there are little, as I said, alpha through lambda, and then all the A's and B's and C's to provide one little sign for analyzing a text. He then takes these sequences and this is what this text is like, this is what this text is like, which is just a string of letters and arrows and so on. And you would think that all of them would be, what? Alpha through lambda, and then A through W, and then that's it. And no, there's all over the place, and that's a huge compound. And I'll be putting a couple on the screen right here just to sort of show you what is meant by these sort of strings of letters. But they still have a logical sequence. So he's presenting these functions in their most linear, but they don't necessarily always happen in this. So you have this pairing. You have the difficult task is set. The solution is found by the hero. The solution is not found by the false hero. And then ultimately the hero is recognized. And of course, the false hero is exposed. Perhaps the clearest and most common example of the false hero test at the end of a narrative, when someone arrives unrecognized, has been marked, has been branded, is of course in Cinderella, where all of a sudden, I don't know why do I always say all of a sudden, the prince is now looking, and the prince fundamentally, the prince in Cinderella is doing the Dramatis Personae of the princess and her father, because that's just the way that Propp's narrative works. So the prince shows up and sets this difficult test. And the test is about being able to recognize, or really the hero proving themselves the hero by how they were branded. And how is Cinderella branded? Well, she leaves her shoe. So there's this token, this proof of concept, or this proof of identity of the shoe. So the prince shows up, and the first stepsister is the false hero, is false hero number one, and puts on the shoe. And in the Grimm's version of Cinderella, of course, she's like, I can't put the shoe on. And her stepmother, I don't have a stepmother one. Her stepmother says, well, you're going to be a princess. Why don't you just keep on chopping off pieces of your foot until it fits in that shoe? And because you don't need to walk. And they think that's a good idea. And so it gets all the way. It's like, hey, this is my princess. And they go halfway to the castle, and then these birds come out of nowhere. I'll explain that. No, I won't. Read it. These birds say, hey, look, there's blood coming out of her shoe. You really think that's the right one? And the prince like, what? And takes this back to the store. It's like, this is broken. And so like the next stepsister comes and like same thing. It's like, I can't fit in this shoe. And the stepmother says, cut pieces of your foot off. You don't need to walk. Just keep on whittling down that hog until, lo and behold, you can get your foot in there. And does so. And the prince is like, oh, my princess. And go, blood and shoe, birds, what's going on? Return. And then it's only when, well, I guess I have this third daughter. You can try her shoes on. Slipped right there. Perfect proof of life. Here, the false hero is often typically punished at this time, or if the false hero is the villain, they are punished. The villain often is punished by death earlier in struggle. but not necessarily. The villain could have somehow survived at this point. The punishment might not be the form of death. The punishment might be the form of exile or something, or banishment, or just sort of overt disapproval. Really depends, but fundamentally it happens. The hero is transformed in some way. If they have been maimed in their branding, they are healed. If often they, at the very least, they are transformed from perhaps their lowly outfits to splendid raiment, and lo and behold, they have achieved the full transformation from the lowly, unlikely, least likely person from that humble circumstances to ascending the throne, because it ends fundamentally, almost inevitably, with a wedding, and the hero and the princess wed. Sometimes they just go to a party and dance over the closing credits, but for the most part it's some kind of celebration. And what's happened is that they are now at some kind of new stasis. They are in some kind of heteronormative bond, they are adults, and they are going to have lots and lots of babies, and they are going to return to a situation that is almost like situation alpha, almost like that initial calm stasis at the very, very beginning. Yes.